I've spent my career 10 years in engineering and 10 years in product. And I've had diverse engagements with open source initiatives throughout my career. So in today's talk, I want to share my journey in open source as an engineer and as product. And I have a call to action for the open source community to embrace product talent. Because as you saw from our mentee collection, what comes to mind as an open source contributor is an engineer, software engineer, coder. And they are needed, but so can other people also contribute. And the non-coders, non-engineers can also contribute to open source. And I'm particularly going to focus on the product aspects in open source and how it is relevant and how we can use product talents to grow the open source community. Before we dive into the details of the topic, I want to share my unconventional journey in open source. I got introduced to open source in 2012 when I was volunteering for a non-profit organization, Jan Swasthya Sahyog, who were trying to bring healthcare to tribal regions in India who didn't have any healthcare. And it was interesting. They were the first pilots of RAXA, which was an open EMR, electronic medical record system. So, well, this open source project was being developed all around the world. It was being sort of piloted in tribal regions of India by this group of doctors who left their profession and said, you know, we are going to serve in the tribal regions and start a nonprofit. So to me, it was a very interesting combination of my tech career and volunteering career and how it came together. So I was blown away by the potential of open source. How it could change the society. So I decided at that time what I was doing was hardcore C++ coding, making device management software. So I had my sandbox, I had my repository, we were using version at that time, SVN. And I wasn't aware of GitHub, but I got exposed to it. So at Texas Linux Fest, when I presented about the mHealth project, I got to attend a GitHub workshop. That started my journey. Soon I joined IBM, where I worked on OpenStack. I worked on software Python client. So I started actually as an engineer to get into open source. But then soon I transitioned my career to product management. And that's when I did not find ways to contribute back to the old projects like OpenStack, which I was doing earlier. So, but I also am very involved in ABI, Anita Borg Institute, ABI Technology at Grace Hopper Conference. So I organized an open source day at GHC ABI. I know Finos is going to be there this year. So I'm very happy to see that. And I did that in 2016, and that was a way to support Open Source Day at GHC. Google Summer of Code is a mentoring program. I have mentored ABI students, ABI mentees, to participate, encourage them to participate in open source through Google Summer of Code. And it was at USAA that I got into DevSecOps and cloud transformation product, a lot of what Robert talked about, open source governance and establishing partnerships with legal and security stakeholders. So I got to work on like GitLab, Artifactory. So that's when I saw the other side of the open source. It was not just as a user, but actually making open source adoption easier for USA developers. I was in developer experience. So here, I actually worked sort of like a product lead on open source technologies. And I'm very proud to say that we reduced the time of procurement of open source libraries from 2 to 3 weeks to in a click, in less than a minute, by using the right technologies, continuous scanning, and CI/CD pipeline integration. After I left USA, I still wanted to be associated with open source, and I spoke at OSNA, Open Source North America, about dependency management in open source. And I got introduced to this project, Ortelius, which is a SDLC security project by OpenSSF. And I helped out as product and community managers, helping them understanding their users, personas, journey maps, and evangelizing the solution through blogs, hackathons, and outreach. And since I joined JP Morgan Chase, I've been involved with FinOS. I'm helping out with OSR SIG, and I'm also trying to get into AI SIG, AI readiness, because that aligns closely with my work. So as you might have seen, even though it overlapped with my engineering career only for 1 or 2 years, I've been involved with open source in various ways and through diverse activities and engagements. And this does not come to mind when you think of an open source contributor. So I like to think that I've been an open source contributor, not in just the traditional sense, but in different ways. And that's how I got started into thinking, how many product people contribute to open source? And very frankly, I couldn't find the data. I looked at Octoverse, I looked at open source contributor research. There's a lot of data about where the developers are, how many developers are, geographic and all, but I couldn't find out, are there any product managers, how many technical writers and all. So I picked this data from Open Source Index, and you see that there are a lot of product-focused companies who are giving their contributors to open source. These are the top 10. But are the product also contributing, or are these only the developers, is the question. That was the question in my mind. Common challenges in an open source projects, based on my experience, and I've heard from others as well, is like technical excellence does not guarantee broad adoption. There could be other factors. I've seen it in my product world as well. Your product might be as awesome as it is technically, but if the onboarding is not good, if there's not enough marketing, if there's not enough outreach, it's not going to get adopted. Similarly, understanding users' need. It might be a very tech-savvy solution, but if the solution is to entertain guests in front of the lobby while they're waiting for elevator, the simple solution might be a low-tech solution, putting a mirror to keep them engaged in this. So you have to understand the user's need to make any project successful, not just open source. And open source, I remember when I was working on mHealth projects, they created this awesome way of tracking your health and your doctor's visit and all for rural women in India. But they forgot, or these people who are developing did not have an understanding of how rural women in India might use these cell phones. They don't have cell phones. A lot of them are not literate. And so ultimately, the product failed. And what the workaround was to, in native languages, send voicemails to help reach out the rural women in India for their maternity care. So this is just an example of you really need to understand the users. Your solution might not be reaching the last mile because of your lack of understanding the persona or profile of your users. Community engagement, evangelization, I read one of these reports that's one of how welcoming the community is one of the biggest factors on how engaging the contributors will be and how many contributors you get to it. Right now, a lot of these things are done by the users and developers and contributors of the open source projects, which are primarily engineers and architects. So what I was going to say was, why doesn't open source community look into delegating these tasks to product professionals who are good at some of these things, who have a lot of experience in it? So before we dive into that, let's talk about what do product managers do. I saw initial survey, there were 3 or 4 engineers, I don't know. How many of you have done product in your career? Okay, so you see 4 or 5 houses, that's good. So those who have done product management know that our life really varies day to day, product to product, company to company. There is there's more of a profile of what an engineer does or an architect does. Product managers' life varies a lot. And the perceptions of what they must be doing or they might be doing vary a lot as well. But let's dive further into, this is the pragmatic marketing catalog for PM activities. Pragmatic marketing started doing these trainings when product management was picking up. And on a day-to-day, the reason the previous slide looks like that is because you can see all these things in a product manager's day-to-day life. You could be, worrying about technical aspects, marketing aspects, strategic aspects. And maybe open source does not involve or need all of these boxes, but I'm sure there are some of these things that are already being done or need to be done. For example, awareness, nurturing, advocacy, product roadmaps, even competitive landscape. When you're launching a new project, you have to do competitive landscape. Is it needed? Are there other sister projects which are doing the same thing? What is the unique value you're adding? These things are being done by either the founders or the engineers or initial, and they become the community advocates. But I haven't seen a lot of product folks involved. I've seen some. I heard Kubernetes, Kelsey was telling me Kubernetes had a product in the founding team, and there are some, but not too many. So this gives you an understanding of where all product could help, and it comes back to the question of open source needs more than just code to be successful. And if you're trying to find an intersection, these are things where I feel product could help. It could help. If you understand your users' personas, you could help in prioritizing your long list of GitHub issues. You could start adding labels. Who is this issue for? You might have different users and personas. You can start using labels. You can align them. The readmes and all, I've seen GitHub readmes which are very like, here, just download it and execute it. Or you could start adding more context of why this project came into service and what is the vision, what are we trying to achieve, what is our North Star, right? And that might not be as important to a person who's contributing or using that project, but somebody who is a first-time contributor, that will make a huge impact. And I tried to do that with Ortelius, the project that I did, to share the goal and the vision, because as product manager, you are aligning, you're selling the dream. And in open source, you should also do that. You sell the dream for the first newcomer until he buys the dream. Outreach, adoption, program management, market fit, well-articulated value propositions, speaking to conferences about your project, writing blogs, hackathons, collecting use case stories, customer advocacy. These are all places where product is very successful and have been in their careers in corporate lives. So why not leverage them in open source as well? The way I see is a PM in open source is a win-win. Throughout my career, I have mentored a lot of aspiring product managers who want to move into product management. They could be students, they could be engineers who was like, I want to do something new. But it really helps if you can actually do it and try it out to know for yourself. And it also helps you give that break, because product management is not a career that you can go and study, though there are masters in product management. But initially, it was just being done. There was not a curriculum or a degree in product management. It's just the business sense, the product sense that you gain by doing these things. It's a very hands-on profession. And I feel like it's a win-win when open source can provide this fertile ground for these aspiring or practicing product professionals who want to build a public portfolio, who want to give back, who want to just get a hands-on experience on a real-life project, who want to work on cutting-edge technology. Maybe their daily life, they're not getting those projects. So it's a win for product managers. And then open source, as we already talked about, gets a whole new set of contributors, gets better customer experience, UX, developer experience, the contributor onboarding, et cetera, can also be alleviated if you involve these folks who have focus on these areas, and let the developers and the engineers focus on the technical tasks. Better evangelization and marketing, we already covered that. And how do we go about it? So this is Julie Nicheva's PM Daisy framework, which again boils down the pragmatic slide that I shared. What are the broad categories or spokes of a product management? And every open source project can sort of do a check mark. Do I need UX in this project? Is this project important enough that UX can make or break it, or it's just APIs and I can write a README and then it's not needed? You can understand which parts of product management are needed in this open source project, or that might already be happening. For example, marketing, when you choose the name, that's when marketing starts. You choose the name, you stand it out. When you write the README, it stands out. When you do the release notes, it stands out. So that's marketing. Program management, these contributors are globally around the world. How do you manage and put them on the same project board? GitHub, I don't know if anybody is from GitHub, but GitHub used to not have their project board initially, and then later on they started GitHub projects on the open source repository. And that was sort of a recognition of the fact that every project needs program management or project management on that. Similarly, partnerships, like we have already seen, OS Climate is partnering with Finas, and similarly, all open source, there's strong partnership between open source projects that can be enabled. Research, we already talked about it. There's research and PM artifacts that some open source projects might need and might not need, and it could be customized based on what is needed. So my suggestion would be to identify and label the issues and what project needs and where product can help. Even in your GitHub repository, you could start writing, and I know in Artelius we have started, a community reach label, and then we identify, in the month of March, we are doing a blagathon, and also rewards to the community contributors. Who's the star contributor? How do you reward? You give a badge, or you give a conference tickets and all. So we have done a lot of these issues and projects, and understanding the customers, who are the people using it, data analysis, etc. So we tag them with community outreach so that, and I have gotten at least 1 or 2 mentees. It's easy for them to pick up because the first contribution is the hardest, as we all know in open source, right? So when we are telling a product manager to contribute, you find those low-hanging fruits which are actually product specific. It becomes much easier for them to contribute. I think the other thing that I feel to embrace product in open source we need is matrix for PM impact and presence in open source. As I mentioned in my previous slides, I couldn't find the data. So I think there needs to be more awareness that there are non-engineering contributors in open source world, and that data needs to be bubbled up so that we can track how many are there and what is their impact. The other is fostering a community of PM open source volunteers. As I mentioned, I have received a lot of students or practicing professionals who's like, I want to try product management. And I also ventured into product management organically. A lot of people don't start in product management. So I feel like it's like a matchmaking, people who are interested in product management, or maybe they are practicing product management and they want to volunteer for certain projects. So how do you do this matchmaking? How do you collect this list of volunteers is a question, which I started with a LinkedIn group. I have a LinkedIn group of product management volunteers. It's not very active because I haven't figured out how to match them to the right skill and write the product. I'm hoping, after these talks, I'll be able to identify some key open source projects which can use product help, and then pair those product managers based on their interest, etc., to actually start this flywheel. So now the next question that comes to mind is, where do we find these PM contributors? And it ties back to how do we foster that community. So I think there are different types of products, professionals, or aspiring PMs that we can try. One is, as I already mentioned, somebody who wants to break into product management. Somebody who is doing product, but they're either working on an open source product in their company and they want to contribute back, or they could be working on product on something else, but they want to do something as a side hustle. PMs looking to refine their PM or tech skills in a specific domain. For example, I remember there was one mentee who said, I want to learn Kubernetes and I want to learn SDLC. So we found a lot of SDLC type of open source projects for him to contribute. Then definitely students. There are lots of students who are looking to start their career in product itself. And sometimes it's good to know whether this is for you or not. And the best way to do that is to just contribute and be, and that gives you an idea of what product career looks like so that you can pivot early in your life rather than spending 10 years in that life and then realizing, maybe that's not my thing. So I have come across all these different type of personas who are looking or interested in, trying out product skills and open source. Then there is an organic intersection of PMs and open source. I think I already covered that, but when open source gets used at a company, for example, if you're using GitLab has an open code GitHub, so you know that these are open source components of it. When PM contributes back to an open source out of personal or professional interest, and then oftentimes like Chris, who are involved in OSPO or, so they have a very good idea of what open source looks like in enabling open source within the company, and they are more likely to go and contribute back in open source as well. Our OSPO team, Robert and his team, is heavily here. So they are generally interested. So I'll leave you all with a call to action. If you are a PM, explore open source if you haven't yet explored open source. And if you are involved in an open source project, you're a maintainer or contributor, start identifying how you can figure out tasks and process or projects for a PM to come into the project and become a power contributor to your project. With that, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you share my passion, I'll add you to the product management volunteer community. And if you have any projects that you think we could use product skills, that would, I'd love to hear from you. And happy to take any questions. That is true. That is true. First of all, when you get a engineering perspective on looking at things, because you make some assumptions, and maybe I've been an engineer. If I'm just installing, I'm doing a pip install, I'm doing those things, I'll just copy it and maybe not even read the README, right? I just go to the code and it's like, let me just install it and then try it out. That's one way to go. But then there are the people who is like, I want to try, what is this project about? Let's find out why it exists and all. There are all kinds of people, and you're missing out if your README doesn't cater to those kind of people. So definitely I feel that, diversity helps in bringing the project to be able to cater to more wider audience. Yes, so even within product management, like I've done at various companies, sometimes you actually take care of the P&L, and sometimes you don't. If it's an internal product, sometimes you don't take care of the P&L, or in IBM we used to call it green money or blue money, because it's an internal product consumed by internal people, so we would keep some account of because we have resources, but then it won't be real, it's just blue money, not green money. But so fundamentally, I think the P&L piece, the way it breaks down is there's no revenue and there is no resource accounting, like what's your money going towards and what your resources, because the contributors are coming without any revenue benefits, right? And the product is being sold without any revenue, right? So that P&L piece gets lost. Having said that, I know like Google Summer of Code. So Google sponsors the Google Summer of Code because it sees the value in uplifting open source. So there's like a community upliftment and ultimately the business impact, which is why organizations like Finos exist, right? Neutral ground, open source. That's a good example. Yeah, I started by contributing to figure out how a product manager could contribute. And, like this is Ortelius website. So they have these content section, where I've contributed blogs, I've contributed this, and others have contributed as well. And this is by example, And definitely we could create a repo or start something where we could guide that these are past projects, and this is what if you want to improve it or go in this direction, here are some examples. I agree. Yeah, that's been, so I heavily encourage my mentees to go and check out open source, and that's their standard feedback. I looked, there are so many repos. I don't know where to go. I don't know where, there are no labels. There are low-hanging fruits, which is good, but most of the low-hanging fruits are coding tasks, right? So which is, I feel like on the open source community that we need to start identifying these, technical writing or creating personas, when, depending on what stage the project is, if we start putting out those issues, we'll get pull requests, or it will be easier to identify, and which is why maybe we create a common taxonomy around these kind of issues so that they're more easily to find out. I was talking to Chris that we might want to do a proof of concept with JPMC open source projects. And maybe next year we come with show and tell. I'd love to. Yeah, that's my takeaway, to find out these projects where we can help, I know it stole all my audience, but I know I've been meaning. I looked at UX. There's a talk on UX on FTC. I'm planning to attend that. But thanks for calling this. Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed.